Hello, and welcome back around the bonfire. It is a hot, muggy day in Chicago, but that's all right because the fire burns bright. Chicago Fire victorious over New York Red Bull last night, 1-0 at Soldier Field. Always great to get a home win. We are missing our man with the sacks today, so R.I.P. Allen in that sense. But I've got Tim and DJ with me here. Fellas, how are we feeling on this Sunday?
Well, I'm feeling like Allen is not dead, just not present. So
yeah, but it's like when Eloy Jimenez missed like a half a season because he ran into a wall and they brought his jersey out with them. Same vibes. DJ, how are we feeling?
I had to think. I was trying to think of something funny to say, and I can't think of anything right now.
Yeah. I know that feeling.
His answer is present.
DJ used to read mylifeisaverage.com, and so whenever people would ask DJ, he would say GOAT. Shout out all my MLA readers from 2007 or whenever that was. But anyway, that's irrelevant. Pleasure to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit of Chicago Fire, New York Red Bull action that happened last night in the great Soldier Field. Obviously, Chicago Fire coming out victorious, so we'll dive deep into all that. But first, we're going to start with a little bit of news, starting with a game that's actually happening as we record here. First and foremost, Brian Dowd making his first appearance for Chicago Fire in any form or facet, starting in goal for Chicago Fire 2 today against Michael Bradley's Red Bull New York 2. That still feels weird to say, if I'm being totally honest, but good for him. I hope it goes well. Although today, not a great start, as I believe right now Fire 2 are up 6-2. Is that right, Tim? I don't have an eye on the scoreboard.
Yeah, I don't have the score up either anymore, but it was 6-2 last time I checked, and Red Bull are down by Red Bull 2 are down by a man. So,
and
tough luck for Michael Bradley's first team that he's ever coached on his own, and Sam Williams' former team.
Hashtag Sam Williams revenge game. And also shout out to Jason Shukaluk, who has a first half hat trick with a fourth goal already added.
I was wrong. He didn't get a fourth.
Okay.
Misreading that.
Well, a hat trick in the first half, still remarkable for the young man.
Yeah. 20 minutes too. It's not like it was like he snuck it in at like the 45th minute.
Yeah, God, sneaking in a third goal in the 45th minute. Ooh, so impressive.
20 minutes is a lot more impressive than that. One of them was a PK, but like still,
that is true. That is true.
Scoring
I always think it needs to start from like the buildup of the first goal and not from like when the goal went in, because that feels a little disingenuous to me. It's like when a football team, like an American football team, scores a touchdown with like 2 minutes left in the third quarter, and they're like, they were trailing with 2:01. It's like, well, yeah, but they had the ball for 4 minutes before that,
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. What I'm saying is with Shukaluk, like the hat trick, he completed his... Oh, he did get a fourth, by the way. That did count. So did get a fourth in the second half. And he had the hat trick in the 20th minute. So it's not 20 minutes after his first goal, like 20 minutes in.
Oh, in the first 20 minutes. Yeah, that's impressive.
In the first 20 minutes. So like he played 20 minutes of football and scored 3 goals.
Shout out my boy Jason. In less exciting Chicago Fire news, unfortunately, Christopher Mueller officially ruled out for the rest of the year. He's been placed on the season-ending injury list. He revealed in a video from the club's channels this week that he's suffering from pericarditis, which has kept him out all year due to that and some further complications. So obviously, best wishes to him. Hopefully, we do see him back on the field in 2026. I know it's probably, as much as we all think it's unfortunate that he has yet to see the field this year, it is even tougher for him. So our thoughts and our wishes are with him. There is some roster implications there. So Tim, if you want to kind of walk through a little bit of what this means for the Fire for the second window, that would be appreciated.
Sure. So they placed him on the season-ending injury list, which basically means that you can replace him with whatever roster designations he had. So a player up to his existing salary doesn't have to be like an exact match, but it just can't be more than he was making. And it can be a long-term deal, short-term deal, whatever. It just has to be that cap hit or below. It's not like Chris Mueller was an international or anything like that, so that wouldn't be a factor. And so he no longer is on the roster officially. So that frees up a roster spot and it frees up the salary. It's not like directly adding money to the cap because they can't take the like $700K-ish that Mueller made and combine it with like $200K and get a $900,000 player. It's just got to be a player making what he made or less.
Yeah, and I mean, still honestly bodes pretty well for a team that needs all the roster flexibility it can get. So we'll obviously talk a little bit more transfer as things start to unfold with the window too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just, to be clear about this, like pericarditis, it's not going to be a permanent situation in his life. It's something that he will get over. We've seen pro athletes be diagnosed with it and then compete at a very high level for years afterwards. Chris Mueller's out of contract with the Fire. But obviously that means he's a free agent. He could sign with any team. He and his agent could negotiate with the Fire for a deal to continue him on, which, depending on exactly what everyone is feeling numbers wise and stuff like that, the Fire are obviously most familiar with the exact situation and the work that he's been doing, to the extent he's been able in training and all of that. And so it can make a judgment there. But either way, we wish him well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there is an aspect of this too, where it's like, frankly, the fact that they waited so long to put him on the season-ending injury list says a lot in my mind. Like they were really hopeful that he would be able to play this year and be an impact player on this team. Like they need wing depth, and he is a guy who can provide that. So hopefully he's back. Hometown kid, would love to see him kind of continue that route. But like you said, Tim, regardless, what matters most is his health, and wish him the best moving forward, whether it's here or elsewhere. From there, the only other piece of kind of half relevant news, I tossed it in there because there were always some clamorings on Twitter for it. Thomas Mueller not officially, has been linked to Vancouver Whitecaps. He has now said he'll be playing in MLS moving forward. Tom Bogert reporting that he has had contact with Vancouver after being rejected by Cincinnati. It did seem like there were maybe at points the Fire were interested, but obviously doesn't seem to be the big DP that everybody's hoping for, at least not in this window, right?
Yeah. And there were reports out there that Bastian Schweinsteiger had spoken to Mueller, and they were very close in their time in the national team together, and all of that. They know each other very well. About, MLS, life in MLS, not necessarily the Fire specifically, but like you would think that this would be a good moment maybe for the Fire to think about reaching out to Basti, who I don't think has returned in any capacity since his contract expired, and like be like, hey, do you want to like check and see what we got cooking over here in Chicago? Because it's a radically different sort of like just like vibe around the team than it was he was here, in terms of like both of like the budget, the ambition, and like the new performance center. When we spoke to Paul Cadwell, who gave us the tour for media when the center was just kind of like opened, like the first official unveiling look that we got, and he mentioned the Bastian's sort of reaction the first time Cadwell was walking him to Fire training at SeatGeek, where it just is such a long distance to get from like the inside of that stadium to the outside, and you're like crossing parking lots and stuff like that. And Basti's like, where are you taking me? Like, where are we going? And like, like that just goes to show it's like, from, Manchester United as his most recent club, which doesn't have the best training facility in the universe, but still, to like crossing parking lots to get to a artificial turf pitch to train, it's like a world of difference, right? From what he's used to. And that is no longer the case.
Yeah. Well, and hey, speaking of Manchester United, they're training at the Fire's facility this week ahead of their the Premier League summer tour in the US here. And frankly, like Ruben Amorim in the press conference was very complimentary of what his experience has been working with the Fire so far, or with the Fire organization.
I will say that Manchester United, they did talk to Manchester United about some of the choices, and like other Premier League teams and teams around, like some of the best teams in the world, about like their training facilities, what they have, what they didn't have. And there were things that teams in the Premier League, who will not be named, but I'll just say the story is relevant here, were like, well, we wanted to get this, but we couldn't afford it in the budget, that are in the Fire's training center. So, that's the thing about the ambition. I do wonder if I'm going to try to find a way to sneak this in next time we talk to Greg, but just wonder with the Fire having finished 15th in the East last year, if Amorim has come to him for advice about how to get above 15th place in the table, in a new season.
Come on, Tim. They're massive. They don't need any help from little old us. Come on now.
They're now humbled.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's another sleeping giant who wears red, Tim. Let's not mock our own kind, okay?
Fair enough.
Anyway, we'll move on now to more relevant topics. The last thing I'll say, Harold Osorio just added the 8th goal for Fire 2 against Michael Bradley. So clearly there's something personal here. Somebody has some beef down at an MLS Next Pro level. Maybe Sam Williams is just really well beloved in the locker room, but we'll talk.
And although Michael has said that he learned a lot about being a professional athlete, and when his dad was coaching the Chicago Fire in their inaugural season, and then like the couple seasons after that, he also was in it wasn't quite the same academy setup that it is now. It wasn't close to the same academy setup, but he was in that setup and credited the time there with like becoming the player that he is. So like maybe he's a secret Fire sleeper agent this whole time.
That would be an interesting concept. Maybe we need one more bald guy to make the trifecta complete, like Wonder Twins. But they touch their heads together instead of rings.
That's Andrew Gutman erasure. I'm just going to put it out there.
Well, I mean in the front office staff, right?
Or Greg Broughton erasure.
Well, Greg Broughton, Greg Berhalter, and Michael Bradley.
All right, fair. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a triforce. Anyway,
there's no other bald coaches with the Fire this year, so
not that I can think of, at least. Anyway, we'll move on.
Good head of hair on Felipe.
12 minutes in, we'll finally talk about what the game is actually, what's actually going on. So Chicago Fire did win against New York Red Bull in Chicago last night. And I actually have an interesting question, Tim. Did anybody else notice on the broadcast that they were calling it Red Bull New York instead of New York Red Bull? All this time I thought it was New York Red Bull. Am I going crazy or were they?
It's New York Red Bull, but it's RBNY is the abbreviation. So it's sort of like, and it's like Red Bull Salzburg and all that. So
yeah, well, that's why it's like, kind of like,
yeah.
Shout out RB Leeds as well. That's a good one too. Sorry. There were
how many different Premier League fan bases can we piss off in one podcast while not covering the Premier League?
Let's think about this. We're
at
this.
2, both in Northern England. What can we do to piss off Newcastle? Just mention Saudi.
Stupid. Yeah, it's just Saudi money. I don't think they care about Saudi money. They have a trophy.
Oh, I think they're proud of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at this point, wouldn't you be glad, right? Anyway. Okay, so there were a few rotational changes. Nothing that was too surprising. In fact, in some ways, I think it's more interesting to talk about the things that didn't change. First and foremost, Carlos Turan did return to action for the first time since April, and frankly, he showed off why we miss him and why he had European aspirations in the first place. A great performance, a great 60+ minutes from Turan last night. Jay Davila and Leonardo Barroso also continuing to feature in the starting lineup over Mauricio Pineda and Jonathan Dean. I think we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but certainly the best we've seen them play together this year. Jay Davila looked good. He looked good. He looked like an MLS player. He didn't look lost out there. There's still room to grow and improve, but I think probably the best performance we've seen from him in a Fire shirt.
We'll talk more about him in a minute, but like I think that he did a little bit more than that, but I think we can get into that in a bit.
Yeah. I may be bearing the lead a touch. Hugo Kuipers did bag a penalty in the 44th minute just before the first half ended, and that proved to be the winner and the difference maker. As the media team so kindly pointed out, that's his 5th game-winning goal of the year, so an impressive mark for the Belgian up top. Chris Brady also recorded his 2nd clean sheet in as many weeks, so 2 in a row for the young American now, who is. I am more surprised we haven't heard any kind of rumors or swirlings about Chris Brady. That could obviously change in the coming days as we get deeper into the window. And then finally, it did kind of seem like Jonathan Bamba monstered Philip Zinkernagel. I think we finally saw some of the minutes catch up to Phil, and a rest proved very, very worth it for Jonathan Bamba as he looked more like the DP that Chicago Fire were hoping to get when they signed him from Celta Vigo. Andrew Gutman also left with an injury late in the game in the 78th minute. Jonathan Dean replaced him on the left side. It does seem as of this point, I believe Alex shared this morning that it is fairly minor and they would expect him back after the break here.
That's what Greg told us, that it looked like he couldn't continue that game, but it didn't look like it was going to be a permanent or a long-term issue whatsoever. So we'll see if he's training in the next week or two as the Fire get ready for their next match. But
good time for a bye week, I think, regardless. Yeah, a lot of minutes on those legs for Gutman. I think we talked about last week. This is the most he's ever played in an MLS season. And the last thing worth noting, this was the 2nd largest crowd of the season, 29,000, just under 30K. And that is with Cubs White Sox happening with what feels like Louisiana type weather from this corn sweat that we have going on. And Chicago showed up. There's also a Chance the Rapper post game concert, which if you stuck around for, it was a good time. I was actually really excited that he didn't only play new stuff. It was a lot of the classics. Tim, thoughts on Chance the Rapper, on the crowd, on anything we've discussed here?
Really wish that I gotten to see more Chance the Rapper, but I have never seen athletes take that long to get ready to talk to us. And it's like, dude, you could just talk to us for 5 minutes and then go and see Chance the Rapper. But no, they took their sweet time. So I did not get to see the majority of it.
And then they talked to you.
Uh,
That's unfortunate.
Not unless he was hanging out in the showers in the locker room, which would have been an interesting way to have to perform during the concert.
You never know. You never know.
Yeah, I certainly don't know because I wasn't out there. But caught the end of it. It was fun.
Yeah, it was a good time. So Tim, I'll ask your thoughts kind of before we get into the nitty gritty here. Big picture on how this feels. I think the big thing we talked about coming into this was it is kind of a must win game as much as you can have a must win game in July in MLS. Fire do enter that playoff spot firmly now. They're 2 points ahead of Red Bull with a game in hand. How are you feeling kind of 24 hours removed from that victory?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good victory, right? Like, I think that we can talk about a lot of the nitty gritty stuff, and like, there's things that I think made it far short of perfect, including like, no goals from open play. But the other way, like keeping the clean sheet the other way, so no goals conceded, which is great. And I think that just shows the progress this team has made. But it was the kind of win that we need to see the team get against like mid-table teams that they're fighting for playoff spots with in the team's like last 10 games. And if they keep on doing that, like it's simple, they will be in the postseason and probably not in like the number 9 kind of like play-in spot that they're in right now, but in a situation where they're in the playoffs properly and don't have to have like a one-off before getting into a 3-game series. And I think that, 3-game series, you think, or best of 3, I guess is the way of putting it. Typically, like in a one-off, like crazy things can happen, and so you can have wild results. In a 3-game series, I think the feeling is that like best of 3 favors the team that is overall more talented, and I think we can now start to say that the Fire are outperforming the teams around them on the table, right? Like when you look, like they are, NYCFC is directly ahead of them. Charlotte's ahead of them, Charlotte's ahead of that, and then Orlando City's ahead of them. The Fire have looked really good against those opponents, and I think that like if push came to shove, I think it would be comfortable to say the Fire are a better team. But they don't have those results yet, right? And a little bit of it's having that one game in hand, but I think that they've not been the team that they're playing like now the entire season.
Yeah. 100%. I was going to say, I think the same thing you said, which if you look around the table, right? New York City FC, that could have been a win. New York Red Bull, we saw them split that first game, could have gone either way. Charlotte, you have 6 points against. Orlando City, you have 4 points against. Inter Miami, you played to a draw, right? You played to a 0-0 draw. Granted, that was at home, but that was also Miami full strength.
And granted,
they've had Rodrigo de Paul, and they're 2 games behind.
Yeah, and Inter Miami also still have, like, they've got 2 games in hand over the Fire, which means that they've really kind of got 3 over most of the pack. And like, they could conceivably have 51 points after 25 games, which would be enough to put them ahead of the supporters at the top of the Supporter Shield rankings, right?
The other thought there, though, to be entirely candid with you, is they're about to play 3 extra league matches plus League's Cup in the next 2 months. Like that,
and that's a lot of minutes to be putting on legs that are in the wrong side of 30 and typically wrong side of 35 and 36, right? So it's an if, right? It's not an automatic. And I think that we saw around the time the Fire played them, like where the cracks are in this team. They're doing some things that they weren't last year that I think is good, but I think that there's for them. But I think that there's also some stuff that they really don't have without Tata, in the dugout for them. And we'll see how they do down the stretch. I wouldn't, let's put it this way. I don't think Carlos Duran is shaking in his boots at the prospect of facing Lionel Messi and co again. And I don't think he should be.
Absolutely not. All it means is that he might get a move to Newell's Old Boys or potentially even to Miami. Who knows? Maybe they'll scrounge up another $800,000 in game or something like that. Tough to say. It seems like they can kind of do whatever they want, right, Tim? No, sorry. No, but it's interesting as the Fire do go to take on two Western Conference rivals coming up next. They'll get LAFC and St. Louis City both at SeatGeek coming up here. So it is kind of a chance to. It was the last chance for a bit here to pick up points against an Eastern Conference side, and they did. It's a massive 3 points, like I said last week. Feels like a 6-pointer, and I think a lot of that was led by some of the young guns. Obviously, we saw the forwards looking great, lots of chances on goal. You mentioned that there was no goals from open play. I was really impressed with Carlos Coronel. I think he made a lot of stops that kept New York in the game, really gave them the opportunity to get some points out of it. But ultimately, I feel like the most notable aspect was the youth on the field, that being Jay Davila and Leonardo Barroso. We'll start with Davila. This was, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, is certainly his best performance in a Fire shirt, right? It's the best I feel I've seen him look since he got here.
It is by far. And I don't think that that's really a lot. Now, I will say that it came arguably on one of his best performances, if not his best, a week ago. And like, it's been building. So it's not like it came out of nowhere, which I think, if anything, just goes to show that it's not a flash in the pan and that he's probably not reached his ceiling. I think that, against Montreal, which again, easier opponent than the Red Bulls are, and certainly less cohesive with how they play the entire time, although I think they executed their game plan pretty well. It's just not the same quality opponent that the Red Bulls are. So for him to do better against a tougher opponent, I think says a lot. And this was the first game though, where I think you could start to really see flashes of why he is a player that came on such a high transfer fee and why the Fire were so high on him, bringing him in, because he was doing interesting things on both sides of the ball. Like he was threading some pretty difficult passes without spending a lot of time being able to make that pass happen, without having time to settle the ball and stuff like that. He was maybe not being in the right spot at 1 second and then coming out of nowhere and making a recovery the other way. Like, that's the kind of stuff that you really want to see from a defensive midfielder. And if this is like the appetizer for what he's about to be in the rest of the season in 2026 and all that, I think that the Fire, it's starting to look like a very good player. If you just project this out not that much farther and just say a little more consistency, a little more maturity with some of it, and just adjust the speed of the game a little bit more.
100%. And I mean, it also kind of puts you in a completely different realm of what your usage ends up at, right? I mean, you think about there's 9 more games, correct? 9 more games in the MLS season before we get to playoff.
10, I believe.
I thought this was anyway, 9-10 games left before you get to playoffs here. I think we all agree the goal is playoffs, but anything past that first round is a little bit of gravy. Obviously, you would hope for it. But as of right now, I don't know that you expect it. But you look at what this means for 2026, and I don't want to say the roster flexibility, right? Because he's a U22 player who came over on $5 million. Like, that's not nothing, or somewhere in that ballpark. But it does kind of change the calculus a little bit, right? When you factor in Sergio Orahel, Mauricio Pineda coming off the bench, even a guy like Sam Williams, who I know I talk about him, I think, more than anybody else, but deserves a little bit of credit for how he's played and is a valuable bench piece in MLS, right? I feel like it does change the calculus on where the spending goes here. And I guess I get the 2 thoughts that I had written down that I think are worth talking about is, one, are we seeing kind of Greg's plan for the U22s coming into effect, which is these guys who can be, I think, higher level contributors for a year, 2 years before being moved on and sold, hopefully for a profit, ideally for a profit. But then also, how do you balance kind of this playoff push in 2025 with the long-term growth moving to 26 and beyond? I think for both guys, it raises an interesting perspective, because I do think right now the floor is higher with Mauricio Pineda and Jonathan Dean, but the ceiling is certainly higher with Davila and Barroso.
I think that that's more or less the same conversation that we had, with somebody in the press box before the game about Dean versus Barroso specifically. And I think that that's exactly, my interpretation is that Dean is going to give you a significantly higher floor. I think that you feel a little bit safer with him defensively in terms of not being able to make a mistake, but you're also giving up some defensive upside. And we saw what a good 1v1 defender Leo Barroso can be against the Red Bulls, and it's something we've been seeing more and more. While at the same time, he definitely, I think, gives you a lot more offensively going forward. The little flip side of that is we've been seeing more of that from Dean. And, talking to Dean about it, he said that he really welcomed the challenge and that he felt like they were pushing each other to be better. And I mean, I don't know the extent to which, Barroso feels that way necessarily, but it does seem like that's what's happening. And it's refreshing to see, right? Like the Dean that we're going to be putting into whenever he gets his next minutes is not the Dean that we saw, when he came over from USL at all. It's a completely, different category of player. And I think that that's really phenomenal to see that kind of growth. And a lot of it's happened this season. Barroso, he just feels like he could be an exceedingly high level starter. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know if the plan is to sell them on for profit. The way that the U22 initiative works, there's a number which is, I believe, $5 million. And if a player's transfer fee is more than that, it doesn't convert to GAM. Not that necessarily is the most important thing or the biggest thing in the world or whatever, but I think that Berhalter was not bringing these players in so that they could be a profit center for the Fire. I think that that's a possibility that he's probably been open to, but I think that they were brought in because he thought that they could help the team win championships. And whether that's in the next 2-3 years or, next 5 years, whatever. I think that that's up to a lot of things that haven't happened yet, but I don't think that they are just here to collect some paychecks, put in a couple shifts and then be sold on.
And I think from a fan's perspective, right, that is, I think, obviously better in a lot of ways, but incredibly exciting because you look around this team, right, and there is, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know how old Jack Elliott is off the top of my head, but I don't think a single starter over the age of 30.
So Zinkernagel, I believe, is
30. Yeah.
There is 30, as Jack Elliott is going to be turning 30 in a little bit less than a month at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, the age of 30, right? But you have
at the age of 30, but not over. Sure, fair.
You have 3 or 4 guys who are in their physical prime, right? In Philip Zinkernagel, Jonathan Bamba, Hugo Kuipers. I would still say 30 is. I would say 27 to 32 in my head is physical prime. Obviously, there's some leeway there. And then you have Brian Gutierrez, who's 22. Leonardo Barroso, who's 19, Jay Davila. Sorry, we just had a whole conversation about pronunciation. Jay Davila, who is 21, correct?
I believe he's 22 now, but he was 21 when he was initially signed. Yeah. But regardless, it's there's a lot of a lot of good young talent in the squad and not a lot of talent that you're like, well, this guy's, going to have to retire in the next 6 months or whatever, right?
Exactly.
There's no Maxi Morales at 38 years old hanging out in the starting 11 for the Chicago Fire.
Well, not yet, Tim. Be careful. The window is still open. All right.
The Fire's next DP is Maxi Morales and a cash for. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be it.
It's not
giving him a 5-year deal or something crazy.
Absolutely. But it just speaks to kind of the longer term plan here of as much as we all want to succeed in 25, you got to be excited for what's to come in 26 and beyond if this team continues to gel. And I think the last thing we'll talk there is in my mind, and we talked about this last week, so we won't talk it to death, but it's why I like the idea of a 2-4-2 better than going back to the 3-3. You add one more U22 player in this, and it does put you in an awkward spot if somebody's got to move on at the end of the year. But now you have another exciting young player who can contribute to this team now, but also at a much higher level in 2026 when the expectation is you're competing for a high level spot in the East and going into the playoffs as a contender, not just as a team that was excited to be there.
So, since the last time that we recorded the pod, I had a chance to talk to Greg Berhalter in the press conference, and I asked him a question basically about the tension behind getting players to help you win now versus getting players that you think are going to be long-term foundational pieces as you work to build something that this team has not been for a very long time. And I kind of when you ask these questions that you're going to get a lot of boilerplate words and stuff like that. But when you kind of look at some of the things that they say or don't say closely, you can learn a lot from the answers here. And Greg Berhalter mentioned loans specifically, which as one way to sort of be like, this is somebody that can help us in the short term. And I think reading between the lines, the team has long-term targets and they have guys that are like, if we can bring this guy in and give him a 3-year deal, whatever, something like that, then we'll do it. But if we can't get these names, we are not going to look at replacements. We're not going to look at the like discount version of it. Because that's the guy that we can get. And I think that one possibility is that you see the team switch to getting another DP who on a loan for the rest of the season, maybe with an option to buy, maybe not, but that helps the team for the rest of the year. And a player that's not under 22, you're more likely to have a real contributor, this season versus U22s. It feels like you're always kind of rolling the dice with a bunch of factors, including a lot of them. It's the first time that they've been leaving their home countries, or like in the case of Davila, right? Like he had moved from Africa to Portugal already. Like that is that's a big difference. But then moving to North America, where he's not in the same time zone as his family or close to it, and all those things, like it can affect the way that players perform, just because those are human things, and then we're talking about human beings, versus a DP that had maybe like played in a couple different countries in Europe. So sort of like the profile, not exactly Zinkernagel, who's on a TAM deal, but someone that where he's seasoned, he's done it in different countries. Right, exactly. And I think if you do that and you say, look, we don't know if you're going to be in the plans long term, but we're putting you in a fairly big size shop window because there's now a lot more eyes on the player than there used to be. And if you can help us win something and make some noise this year, that helps you and it helps us. So
I think it's just kind of come down to how much I think it goes back to the conversation we had about the Open Cup, where it's incredibly frustrating because you feel like you shot yourself in the foot in terms of needing to compete this year, right? You had the opportunity to have something that you could hang on the wall and say a semifinal or a final appearance. And instead it's, do we need to maybe, potentially sacrifice a little bit of long-term upside for short-term gain to make sure we get into the playoffs and make sure things go smoothly there, even if you don't advance super far? Like, it does feel like a little bit of which do you value more, and you don't want to limit yourself in either direction.
I don't think the team is really, I don't think that's the choice, right? I think that it's like the team will, and I think this is probably just Greg's philosophy more than anything else, of like, if you can't get the target that you want, you don't sign back up to long-term deals, unless it's somebody that you feel pretty confident for, right? And like, so if the Fire were in the Open Cup, it would be, if anything, it would put more pressure on the same situation of like, all right, so we're in this semifinal. We want to make it to the final. We want to win the final. We need to get someone in that we think can help raise our ceiling, even if it's not, the guy that we want, because that guy is not available. He's not moving this summer, or we made an attempt and they ended up not really being like, we ended up not being the guys that get made it. Something like that happened with like the De Bruyne, right? And so basically, so it's the same problem.
Because Patrick Berg is too expensive, we're going to get a loan. We're going to bring in Paul Pogba for half a season. Tough to say.
Yeah, because those are the only two players in the universe the Fire could sign. No, I mean, and Patrick Berg, I think, is an interesting player. I think I discounted the way that the Fire might have rated him a little bit too much, but the teams at the last that I'd heard about the discussions are very far apart in terms of what their assessed value of the player is. And I think, kudos to Greg for not just like folding there. I think that it's probably frustrating for some players, but at a certain point, even if you think the guy is the guy that could help you win over the next however many years, like if you start charging more money, it's like you kind of get to that point when you're like buying a car and you go from here's the base price of the car and then you load it up with the options you want. And you're like, oh, if I knew I was going to be spending that kind of money, I'd have been looking at a different car, right? And I think that their kind of refusal to get slow walked into overspending for a player says a lot of good things. Although I also get the frustration from, like a fan's point of view of like, it's not Greg's money. It's not our money. Mm-hmm. Why don't you just sign the guy and then the team is better than it was the day before you did?
Yeah. I mean, to simplify, it's I mean, as you basically just said the same thing, but to say it very simply, it's you don't spend $12 million on Patrick Berg, so you don't have to overpay for the next guy who you'd like to be TAM and now have to sign his DP because they know you'll spend. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, to a certain extent, it's like if you were looking in that higher category, right? It's like, well, we would have been looking at a player that had maybe been doing it in the Bundesliga and not, in Norway or whatever, right? Like, and you could start getting to some point where it's like, if we're talking this range of money, like if it's 13 million, then what do we get for 15 to 20 million? And well, we could have gotten a better player for 15 to 20 million. And that's not where we were shopping for this guy. So
yeah, it's a little bit of girl math, right? Or boy math, whatever you want to call it. Well, I'm spending 12, so I might as well spend 15. And if I can spend 15, I'll just spend 20 and get something even better. So I like that idea. But talking more about Chicago Fire and spending money that isn't ours, Carlos Turan proved a point last night, and I think that's that he is I think as good as we miss him to be, if that makes sense, right? Despite his injury history, every time he's on the field, seemingly he performs at a very high level, especially in 2025. He's been, I don't want to say outstanding, feels like a strong word, but like very good every time he's entered the field, and maybe it's a little bit of comparison. But in his first action since April, contributed to another clean sheet, which he had in his not most recent start, but his most recent 90-minute performance against Miami. And I think it showed two things, right? One, his quality, why he has the European goals and aspirations, but two, the way an above average center back, we'll say, can lift the tide of that back line. And so I was a little concerned about him and Barroso starting next to each other, just a rust effect against the New York Red Bull team, with the way they play their press. And so I'm curious, kind of, Tim, your thoughts on watching this performance. Do you see this as, okay, we need to bring in another center back of his caliber to ensure we have somebody? Or is it, Carlos Turan, can I trust you to run out the last 4 months of this season and get us to the playoffs?
I don't necessarily think that that's really the calculation, because there's also Christopher Kups, who's working his way back from injury. And it's looked very good. Now, like, I don't think that you put it, it's not a good idea to put the hopes and dreams for the rest of your season on a guy's shoulders who just turned 17. And I don't really think that that's what the Fire would be doing. But I think when you look at the center back pool, all of a sudden, right, it's okay. Well, if Turan is performing the way that we saw him perform this game, where he was very good defensively, he did a lot of things. Had a pretty good look on net that I didn't miss by that much. And talking to him about it, he was like, I noticed that there was the opportunity, and, I was told to shoot more and I shot. It's like, hey, that worked out, or almost really worked out for the Fire. And if he's putting together those kinds of performances for the Fire, I think that you say, okay, here's a quality player now who has, I think, a lot of unexplored upside, right? Like, I don't think we've really seen his ceiling because of the injury limitations and all that around him. You have Christopher Kups, who's a very high-end, prospect that is coming into his own and like could be the guy in the next year or two. And you've got, this season, Omar Gonzalez, who's like a veteran presence that can bring what he can and eat up some minutes there too. And it's like, with now 2 available spots on the senior roster, is that the place that you most need to add another body? And like, where, like, what archetype are they kind of filling with the thing, right? Is it like, young and upcoming? Well, probably not, because you got that. Is it like veteran presence that's maybe a little bit younger than Omar Gonzalez? Like, maybe, but like, how much does that really add? Or, is it like, or does it need to be like, what if you can't get a player that is better than Jack Elliott or as good as Jack Elliott, right? Like, does that help raise the team's ceiling very much? Or are you content with just raising the floor? And I think that you don't make a permanent signing unless it raises the ceiling in that position. And I'm not really sure that the Fire will be able to do that this window.
See, I almost would argue that it's more important to raise the floor than the ceiling there. We like from the perspective of this.
From the perspective of it's a team that's conceded a ton of goals this season and had, like that's
and not to mention you're pairing him next to, on the right side, a young player who, while he has, look, Leonardo Barroso has been a little bit hot and cold this year. I think that's a fair way to describe his play. We've seen at the top end, he has great recovery ability, excellent one-on-one ball skills. He also has the ability to be out of position and get beat, right? If you pair him against somebody who really knows what they're doing and still has the pace to beat him, it can be a tough day for him, right? And I don't think that's unreasonable to say. So you do want to have somebody who is maybe a little more experienced there. And I hear what you're saying. Like we talked,
but I mean, Carlos. I mean, I don't think you're going to get a guy that overall has more of all that than Carlos Theron, right? Like
I agree. And so that's where the question is more: do you bring somebody in and try to move Carlos Theron out, or are you trusting Carlos Theron to run the rest of the season, right? Because the issue is not Carlos Theron's skill. I think we would all agree, like when he's healthy, he is the starting center back. He is the second best guy on the roster. Maybe even better than Jack Elliott at his peak as he gets older, right? Or as he develops more, I should say. The question is more like, do you trust him to be out there for 90 minutes a night from now till November, depending on how well things go, right?
I think it comes down to like, do you sell him on? I think that if it's the right opportunity, right, you have to, like, he is one of a couple sellable pieces on this roster. Just in terms of like what he's paid, what a new deal could pay him, what he could make on the open market. Because a lot of guys, there's still been a lot of roster turnover that has yet to happen. And a lot of guys are on contracts that I think are fairly rich for their level of performances that they're putting together these days. And so if you can get like $3 million, turn that in or plus, right? Get the most GAM you can get this season. That ends up being more valuable to you this season and going forward than having Carlos Theron on the roster for the rest of the year would be. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if that's, but then I think that, if that doesn't exist, right? Because if that exists, I think you do it and then you have to replace him. If it doesn't exist, then I think you have to say, well, here's the pool that we've got now. And then I think you really are looking for someone to raise the ceiling more than you are to raise the floor. And we haven't even mentioned Sam Rogers, who I think we've talked about this, but I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves, he has outperformed any reasonable expectations on him for his first year in MLS. In terms of the number of minutes and the quality that he's done in that, even though it's been, not perfect and not close to perfect. He has proven himself to be a competent option at that position, who's going to make mistakes that will cost you goals occasionally. I think we've seen less and less of that, and he's still growing. And so he's sort of in between, like, way less experienced than Jack Elliott or, Omar Gonzalez for that matter. Way more than, Christopher Cupps, less than Carlos Theron, not as high a ceiling as, so you've got another name in that pack. And again, it's like, if you can't get a guy that's like as good as Jack Elliott, I don't think that it really makes sense to do unless you need to replace Carlos Theron.
Yeah, I think the interesting thought to me there is you mentioned, I think when we talked a little bit about Christopher Cupps in detail, the idea of you need somebody who can start week in and week out so that Christopher Cupps doesn't have to.
Right. And I think Theron is that guy now, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think in my head, if Carlos Theron is here through the rest of the year, cool. I wouldn't expect, like, if Carlos Theron plays the rest of the year, I don't expect him to be here in 2026. I think his skill is enough that paired with his physical profile, he would be moved on purely by like somebody will make an offer, right? He's had interest abroad. He wants to move. And so that's where in my mind, it almost is like, is Sam Rogers that guy? I don't know. I would sort of doubt it, to
be honest, right? Like, I think that Sam Rogers as good as he's been. I think that you still trust him to be a depth option and not a game in, game out starter.
I think he's a good third center back. I think he's a great fourth center back. Like, if he's your third, all right. If he's your fourth, you're in a really, really good spot.
Agreed. Yeah. And so I think that we're kind of saying the same thing here, though, right? Like, it's
a little bit.
It depends on if Theron can go. Now, I think the other thing worth saying is anywhere else, if the Fire are able to move a piece on and get the $3 million in GAM this year, they should do that. Because if the offer for Theron doesn't come in, or like it's not the right opportunity for him, or whatever those things are, until the January window, that would be 2026 GAM for the Fire. So essentially between the two seasons, they could be up $6 million in GAM, or like an additional $3 million by getting $3 million from selling somebody this window, and then $3 million by selling somebody else, or in this case, Carlos Theron, in January. And so I think that you have to look at basically from here on out, if you have the opportunity and it's not going to hurt your team too much, you get the $3 million in GAM every season that you're remotely close to able to do it, because that helps. Just, you can end up really building a ton of cap flexibility and space that way. And that's what we've seen from teams like Inter Miami be able to do so effectively, because they've been able to move pieces on in and outside the league for a lot of profits.
Well, that's why they can sign Rodrigo de Paul, right, Tim? That's what it is.
Indirectly, yeah, that's a very significant part of it. Like, now, that's not why they're able to get Rodrigo De Paul on a TAM deal. But I think, look, De Paul isn't the first guy that has come into MLS. No, I know. But, like, it's worth saying. Like, De Paul isn't the first guy that's come into MLS on a TAM deal because he believes in some part about what the team is selling. And sometimes it's the project, sometimes it's the city. I think with Miami, it's both, and the opportunity to play with Messi. It's something that we saw from Gareth Bale, right? Like he went in for a cup of coffee and a few games of golf, I'm assuming, after training sessions, and helped them win MLS Cup. And the Fire have not been in the category where that's something that would apply to them. But Chicago is an attractive place to live. It's a place that a lot of people know the name of, which is not something you can say about like Cincinnati. If it's a guy coming from Europe or South America. And so Chicago may not be LA and it may not be Inter Miami, but you can offer something once you get in that position. And I think that these are the kinds of things you think through to put yourself in that position in a couple of years.
Yeah, 100%. Anybody not named Christopher Brady can be sold this window, in my opinion, or Philip Zinckernagel, honestly.
And I think that, selling those names would be like, again, you don't want to, you just started building something, you don't want to blow it up, right? Yeah.
I mean, but gosh, you look around the league, and I mean, Lionel Messi, Jordi Alba, Sergio Busquets, Luis Suarez, Rodrigo De Paul. How much help do you need to score on Jonathan Dean? Clearly a lot. That's what it seems like. Last thing we'll kind of do before we move on here, and we had. Actually, there's two things. Tim, this is a really quick 1 second thing I want you to answer for me, like 50 words or less. Spend 30 seconds on it. You said you'll have 2 roster spots available and you may not use one on the center back pool. Where would you use them? Because that's not a conversation we had when we talked transfers last week. And I'm curious hearing you say that. Where would you use them provided Carlos Terán is healthy and in the fold for the remainder of 26?
This was a good game for Brian Gutierrez. And we saw him do a lot of things offensively, but we didn't see him do anything that became decisive. And that's been the story for Brian Gutierrez. I think that upgrading at an attacking midfield position is good. I could see the argument for somebody lying deeper a little bit. That would be okay. But I think attacking midfield could really help raise the ceiling of this squad significantly. And could be the thing that, like, we saw Bamba do everything but get on the score sheet last game. Just like an upgrade, or even someone to push Brian Gutierrez, and who knows if Brian Gutierrez could move or at some point, right? That I think could be the thing that unlocks those things where Bamba isn't doing so much of like working for the perfect pass and looking for the perfect thing, and ends up getting the ball with more space, so he feels comfortable taking the shot and it ends up in the back of the net.
Yeah, interesting thought. I like that as well. I also think if you asked me who was leaving this window, I would say Brian Gutierrez. But
Brian Gutierrez, Carlos Terán are like 2 of the only names that when you look at this roster top to bottom, that you think that is something that teams around the world could see them buying into at a rate that would make sense for the Fire to receive the money from, right?
I could see an offer coming for Chris Brady that was hard to refuse, not necessarily even from the monetary perspective, but from the perspective of Chris Brady would like to be paid more, and he would like to be taken seriously, right? Not the club doesn't take him seriously,
it's right.
But there's a certain lack of respect there.
And it's a difficult cap situation for the Fire where they can't afford to necessarily pay him right now what they would be paying him if it was a contract year for Chris Brady and they had to pay him, So that it's an option going forward. I mean, not that we're really getting into this too much, but I think that, like, Marlon Haile Selassie, I can see there being interest for him in different leagues in Europe. I think that we've seen that his talent level. I don't know if that's something
MLS,
that he really wants.
To be honest with you, if you're a team who needs a wing piece in MLS, would you pay, $1 million for Marlon Haile Selassie?
In MLS or in Europe right now, he has a new kid, and so that's probably a factor of like, does he want, like, where do he and his partner want the kid to grow up and all that, and like maybe it's back in Switzerland. But I think that also the other thing with Marlon is that he's a guy that's like, he deserves more minutes, but there's nobody whose minutes you really want to take away to give him those minutes right now. And so it'll naturally happen sometimes with injury and all that. But it still is a tough situation for him where he could be doing more for some team in the universe. Sergio Orhel Jr., I think, is another name where, like, you can start to see what he can do. And he's not doing all of it yet for the Fire, so you'd probably be selling him a little bit too early to maximize his value and his potential. But that is, like, you can see the profile being attractive to teams around the world. And maybe that's something, right? Like, and I think that that's more or less the list of names that would be ready to move, other than guys that, like, just excluding anyone that was brought in this season because they're working out and it's kind of too early just to flip them, right?
Yeah, 100%. I would almost put Sergio Orahel on that list, right? Of just new to the squad from that perspective.
Yeah, but I mean, again, like, it comes down to, like, what are his career ambitions and goals, and, like, he's obviously getting a lot more minutes now, and, like, but is he ready for a new opportunity? Right.
If it comes and the money's right and he wants to go, I don't think they would stand in his way either. And anyway, last thing we have here, and we'll keep it a little bit quicker because we're already pushing long. The inoffensive offense, no goals in open play from this game. Kuipers and Bamba and Zinkernagel and Gutierrez even had opportunities, had good looks on goal, but did not finish. Generally speaking, a slightly lackluster performance from the forwards, all things considered. There were opportunities, like you said, Tim, but none put away. Zinkernagel didn't look himself. I think, to me, I almost chalk that up a little bit more as like two sides of the coin, right? One is, it happens. Like, you do have those games over the course of the year where you're going to ask your defense to win it for you. But also, too, I did think Carlos Coronel played very, very, very well. Like, he stood on his head. He made a lot of saves. How are you feeling kind of post-game there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Jonathan Bamba had a great game overall, right? Like, now I think that you can see the limitations to what he did, and I've talked about it. There's times when he's getting in on the box and he is looking laterally, like, completely. He doesn't take a peek at Carlos Coronel. Like, he doesn't. Now, he probably is we know he's a good enough athlete where he probably has an intuitive sense based on the last time he saw him to know where Coronel is and all that. But, like, not taking a look at net means that he's not thinking about shooting. He's only thinking about the pass, and that limits what he does. Now, like, we did see him take some shots. We saw him with an decent attempt on a header, and so, like, we were seeing that. I think this was one of Bamba's best games, even though he wasn't on the score sheet. I asked Greg Berhalter about what he thought of Bamba's performance and if there was something that he needed to maybe improve his confidence a little. And he said that he thought that performances like this should be improving his confidence because of how well he played. I don't know that makes you take a look at the goal more often. And I think that just is one of the things that we need. And, Kuipers, it's maybe fatigue a little bit still, so we'll see how he looks after the break. But I think that he's not finishing some chances that you would hope that a guy that has, 14 goals would be finishing. So that's, what it is.
I mean, what, 11 non-penalty goals for Kuipers this year? I think that was his third penalty. That is, I think, how much of this do you contribute to, or chalk up, I should say, to fatigue over the course of the year? I would say a non-insignificant amount. I do think Hugo Kuipers has been, I think this is an adjustment period for him, right? I don't think people expected him to be who he was last year. And then when he started getting service this year, it was, oh my gosh, like, this guy is him, And now teams are prepared for that, right? They know who he is. They're not letting him get these easy looks. And when he does, I almost wonder if it's like he's not getting as many, right? So you're just not converting it as what feels like as high of a clip because your opportunities are going down. And I think it's a little bit mental for him. We talked a little bit a few weeks ago about, like, his body language has not been good. I think it was improved last night. But I almost think it's a little more frustration than fatigue for him. He's a little in his head.
We're having this conversation about a guy that has 3 goals in his past 4 appearances. Just throwing that out there.
14 goals. Like, he's in 5th, I think, for the Golden Boot right now. It's having an awesome year.
It's a world of difference, right? But I think that, the disappointing thing is, I think that there's goals that you just, maybe every striker in the world is going to have some great opportunities they're not going to finish. That's the nature of the position. I think that it feels like there have been too many of those, all things considered. And, I don't know, like, maybe it's him. Now, like, the other side is, like, he's getting a ton of opportunities, and, like, that's the improved thing. Last year, we don't have a lot of, Kuipers missed that sitter because he wasn't getting more than, like, 1 or 2 of those chances in the course of a game. And so there just wasn't a lot of tape of us thinking about that in our heads. But it does seem like a little bit of something is off. I don't know if part of that might be a little bit of, like, combination 1-2 play with Bamba, and not really sure why Bamba's not taking some of those opportunities himself. But again, like it's refreshing to see sort of like the performances, I feel like, pick up in terms of what we've seen from them over the past few games. I thought they had a really good game against San Diego, and like maybe that felt like the turning point. While at the same time, there have been some kind of notable missed opportunities. Although having said that, I think the last time that he had a 2-game stretch in the league, I think without scoring in at least one of those games, back in the like Nashville, like Philly, I think was the last time, because he didn't score against Nashville and he didn't score against Philly. Like that's a pretty good run of play for any striker at any league in the world, right? Giving you a goal every other game, at least.
100%. I mean, like, look, how do I say this? His FB ref chart goes burr, like it really goes burr. He's got 16 expected goals, 13 non-penalty expected goals, which, if you're wondering, already far outpaces what he had last year. I mean, I'm trying to find and see if I can find his.
So, but I mean, I think that what it comes down to is like, not to put like too fine of a point on it, because we're talking about 2 basically as a number here, but it's that he's underperforming his non-penalty expected goals, and you would think a player of his skill and talent level would be performing at or above that number.
He's actually slightly above his non-penalty expected goals. Non-penalty is 13.4, expected goals is 14. So he's
but that's 14 including the penalty. So it's got to be non-penalty expected goals versus non-penalty goals.
Sorry.
So either way you look at it, right? Like he's kind of like too shy of where the model says he should be. Now that's not a lot, right? And that's like a couple of random things happened, and he could have had 3 more, and then we're talking about how he's slightly overperforming it. Although we're probably not talking about it because he's like at the Golden Boot, like around the Golden Boot leader at that point, and like you don't talk about things that are working out that great, other than to be like, man, he's really great. So it could be nothing. I think it's something to keep an eye on. But like I said, I think the performances have picked up, and we haven't seen some of the kinds of misses that we were seeing, early in the summer.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for reference, like the number I was looking for, I finally found it. He's 0.18, repeating some kind of factor there. Goals per shot, and he was 0.14 last year, right? You would think that number would be higher with increased service, higher than it is. I mean, to say not higher than the
it's goals per shot though, right? So it's like he's getting more shots, and he's getting shots in better quality places, and so they're higher. Yeah. They're higher quality shots, right? So it's like all of it, and like again, this is one of those things. It's an individual statistic, but a lot of it's team play around him, and I think we've seen that improve.
Yeah. Anywho, we're running ourselves in circles here, so that feels like as good a place as any to wrap it up. Hugo Kuipers is good at football. Let's just say that. Let's get that on the record. We think he's very, very good. In terms,
but we don't yet have data on the other kind of football. So maybe once the Bears are back training at Soldier Field,
I could see him being a good kicker. You know who would be great as a kicker? Andrew Gutman. He just loves to send it right up over. There is a little bit of a change coming up here, as Chicago Fire will not play again until LAFC on August 9th. I don't know if we Tim, do we have a set schedule for that time period yet, or are we looking to just be back for LA?
I think that we'll probably be back for LA, and then obviously the window is open. The Fire are shopping. The Fire, so like if there's buying or selling going on around the Fire, we will cover that as quickly as we can after the fact, and try to get as much reaction and as detailed of like an analysis of any new income signings and reaction to what it could mean.
And maybe even with some special guests, who knows? Maybe there will be some new faces in around the bonfire. But yeah, would expect to see us back for that preview. That'll be the week of the 9th. So what would that be? August 6th, right around there. That we'll be talking Chicago Fire versus LAFC at SeatGeek Field, SeatGeek Stadium. I always say field instead for some reason. But as Tim mentioned, you will be able to find any and all transfer news relating to Chicago Fire, not only here via potentially some quick fire episodes as things start to shake out, but also on menandred97.com. That's where you'll find wonderful actual journalism from Alex, from Tim, from Max, from all the writers on staff here. You can also stay up to date on Twitter, menandred97, on Instagram as well. It's menandred97. And you can give us a follow on MIR97 Pods. That is the where you'll find all the podcast updates specifically. So if you want to stay tuned into the shows, that would be the best way to do so. Yes, Tim?
Everyone knows this because they've probably been following it, and this is the past for them. But Chicago Fire 2 9, Red Bull 2 2. So that's the highest scoring match in MLS Next Pro history.
Wow. Damn. Darn. Sorry, Austin. Yeah, a huge game for Chicago Fire 2.
And Chicago Fire underground agent Michael Bradley.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, wonderful shot for the boys. Excellent game from them. Jason Shukaluk, we'll see you at the next level soon, brother. Keep playing like that. You'll be here in no time. But anywho, would expect to have some updates for you over the next few weeks transfer-wise. If not, we'll see you back for that preview against LAFC. As always, give us a follow. Give us a look on the website. That's where you can stay the most up-to-date. If you're looking for the best roster tracker in existence, would recommend menandred97.com. That's where Alex and Tim are constantly tweaking and updating their little form with a million different things that tell you all the roster designations that MLS has to offer. But anyway, I say all that to say, thank you for being here. We enjoy doing this, and thank you for allowing us to do so. Thank you for joining us around the bonfire, and come on, you Men in Red.